Danny Evans, a young autistic boy, decides to camp alone at Lake Colton to earn points for a school assignment. While he prepares, his parents Laura and Robert show concern. Even so, Laura chooses to trust her son and gives him a phone for emergencies. After the conversation, Robert says he will take him to the center, and the two leave. Meanwhile, Nick argues with his girlfriend and seeks out his friend Julia. At her house, he vents and claims he is being unfairly accused of cheating. Julia counters, saying he is always getting involved with other girls, which irritates him, because he says he truly loves Lisa. When the tension eases, she comments that Lisa is not as innocent as he imagines. Confused, Nick asks for explanations, and Julia reveals that Lisa lied and that he was not the first man in her life. He struggles to believe it, but she insists there were others. Pressed for a name, Julia invents one and says Lisa was involved with Danny Evans. Not recognizing the name, Nick asks who that is, and Julia replies that it is the weird kid from school, adding that everyone already knows that. Indignant, he accuses Julia of lying, but she claims she only wants to help him. More controlled, Nick asks where Danny lives. Realizing the magnitude of the problem she created, Julia refuses to answer, says that Lisa never cared about him, but that she would know how to take better care of him. Nick rejects her and demands Danny's address again. Meanwhile, Danny calmly walks through the town center and enters a store to buy some items. After looking through the shelves, he finds what he needs and goes to the checkout. The clerk barely pays attention to him, and Danny asks if there is a specific bag available. The man replies that it is out of stock, but Danny asks him to check in the back. He refuses again and asks if Danny wants to take advantage of the weekly offer. As he analyzes the product, Danny begins to explain his reasoning in detail, but the impatient clerk ignores him and quickly does the math to dismiss him. Excited, Danny comments that he is going camping at the lake. The man pretends enthusiasm, but reminds him that he still needs to pay. After a few seconds of silence, Danny hands over the money and leaves the establishment. Back to the duo, they go to Calvin's house, another member of the group. Upon seeing them, Calvin asks what they are planning, and Nick replies that he is looking for a boy. When Calvin asks why, Julia tries to speak, but Nick interrupts her, stating that the boy is dangerous. Surprised, Julia thinks about denying it, but because she likes Nick, she ends up confirming the lie and says his name is Danny Evans. Nick exaggerates even more, calling him a declared predator and claiming that he cannot be arrested because he is autistic. Then he asks if Calvin has a younger sister, and upon hearing that he does, advises him to keep her locked up because Danny would be dangerous. He invents that Julia's sister saw him lurking around the school she attends. Once again, Julia hesitates, but maintains the story, saying her sister is so scared that she cannot even go to classes. Nick states that they need to teach Danny a lesson, although Julia realizes that he intends something worse. He assures that they just want to stop the boy from lurking around schools again, and asks Calvin to join them. Calvin shows insecurity and says he will not go, but Nick does not accept the refusal and begins to pressure him in a threatening way. He asks what he will do if his own sister is the next victim, and whether he will be able to live with the guilt for not acting when he had the chance. Under pressure, Calvin gives in and decides to go with them. Meanwhile, Danny continues along the trail, stops for a moment to consult the map, and after checking the route, continues walking for a few more hours until he reaches the lake, where he decides to set up camp. Danny is pitching his tent, and before starting the work, he enjoys the view for a while. Nick's group goes to Danny's house and knocks on the door looking for him. Laura receives them and asks what they want, and Julia replies that they are looking for Danny. Suspicious, Laura asks why, and Nick explains that they are schoolmates and needed to find him. She then informs them that her son is camping to complete a school assignment. Nick comments that he wanted to borrow a few things, minimizing the situation. Before they leave, Laura adds that it will not be necessary because Danny took some items from his father, including a fishing rod. The information catches Nick's attention, and he asks if he is at the lake fishing, and Laura confirms. She suggests calling her son's phone, but Julia says she does not have the number. Laura offers to give it to them, but Nick refuses, stating that it is not necessary. Then the group says goodbye to Mrs. Evans and says they will let her know if they find Danny. They head off to look for Danny, and Calvin asks if Mrs. Evans knows who her son really is. Nick keeps lying and says she does, but tries to protect him from his supposed crimes. Calvin finds it strange, saying that if he were that monster, he should be in prison. Julia reinforces that they need to find him before he approaches some girl. Nick decides to look for him first at the arcade and then go to the lake. Julia reminds him that they have no money to get there, but Nick promises to figure something out. Even reluctant, Calvin agrees, and they continue the search, while Danny fishes peacefully at the lake, unaware of the danger approaching. Back to the group, they enter a store, and Nick pretends not to know the two while asking for some drinks. The clerk asks for his ID, and while he distracts him, Julia and Calvin begin stealing some products. The man checks Nick's document, and the duo takes the opportunity to run out. The clerk tries to catch them, and Nick takes advantage of his absence to steal more items before leaving. Later, they meet again and spend some time at a local park. After playing, they sit down to talk, and Julia asks why Calvin moved to the city. He explains that his father cheated on his mother, and she decided to leave him and move. With no alternative, Calvin went with her, accompanied by his cousin. Nick comments that it makes no difference, because he does not know any couple in town that is still together. Julia argues back, reminding him that his parents are still married and affectionate, and tells Calvin not to pay attention, because Nick is bitter after being dumped. Calvin adds that his parents were already thinking about moving before the separation. When questioned, Calvin explains that the old town was very dangerous and that once he was stabbed for no reason while returning home. He says he reported it to the police, but was told it could be gang involvement and that nothing could be done. Nick downplays it, saying that happens anywhere. Calvin disagrees, stating that in Cotswold it does not happen, and reveals his dream of entering university and starting a family. Julia comments that they have no chance of getting into college because their parents are broke, but Calvin replies that there are other ways. Bored with the conversation, Nick tells them to hurry because they need to find Danny as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Danny gathers firewood for the campfire and after finishing, returns to the campsite, where he receives a message from his mother. To reassure her, he sends a photo of the lake. At the game house, the group has fun again, and Nick takes the opportunity to steal from a young man. After getting the money, he informs the others that he already has enough for the bus fare. At the Evans house, Laura receives a call from her son saying he is fine. She comments that she received the photo and found it beautiful and says that Robert wants to speak with him. Robert asks if he caught anything, but Danny replies that he did not. His father tells him not to worry and to be careful, and Danny assures him he will. Then he hands the phone back to Laura, who asks what time to pick him up the next day. Danny says he will be waiting at 11 o'clock at the fishing parking lot. Laura says goodbye and reinforces that he should take care. During the bus ride, Nick's anger only increases, and he asks what they will do when they find Danny. Calvin suggests they could just take some of his things and throw them away, but the proposal irritates Nick. He then asks Julia's opinion, and she responds that they will finish Danny off when they find him, an idea that Nick approves. Calvin remains reluctant and suggests looking for him another day, but Nick confronts him, asking if he has already forgotten what Danny supposedly did and what he would do if he saw him with another victim. Calvin states that he would help the girl without hesitation, but insists they could leave it for tomorrow. He also questions the reason for so much anger, and Nick responds that he knows very well what it is, stating that Danny will not leave that place. He walks away after calling him a coward. Calvin tells Julia that he does not want to be part of this, but she argues that they need to continue, because they always do what Nick decides. As they pass by a cemetery, Nick notices that the gravedigger left some tools in the car. He decides to take them to use against Danny. Moving forward with the group, they enter the trail and begin walking, and Calvin asks if that was where Danny made his first victim. Nick lies again and confirms it, saying that he will not hurt anyone anymore. When they reach a river and do not find Danny, Calvin sits down, stating he is tired of looking for him. Nick assures that they will only go as far as the lake, and if they do not find him, they will return home. He says he will step aside to relieve himself, and Julia decides to follow him. When she catches up, she asks what he meant by saying that Danny would not leave there. Nick replies that it is exactly what she is thinking, and asks if she also intends to give up like Calvin. Julia says no, but warns that Calvin may realize that he is lying by accusing Danny of being a predator. Irritated, Nick says he does not care about his opinion and guarantees that he will end Danny no matter what. Sometime later, they reach the lake, but again see no one. Julia comments that it was a waste of time looking for him, but Nick spots someone on the other side and asks who it is. Julia believes it is Danny and suggests they check, and Nick agrees, going to confront him. Before approaching, he tells them to hide the weapons so as not to scare him immediately. When they get close, Nick greets him, but the boy becomes nervous and remains silent. Nick asks him to come closer and asks why he came to that place. Danny explains that he is there because of a school assignment and that he might win a prize for it. Nick shows no interest and asks Julia to hand him a beer, but when he drinks, he complains that it is warm. Calvin asks what is wrong with Danny, and Nick answers that he is weird. Then he says he was looking for him and asks if he knows Lisa Mitchell. Danny confirms, saying they are friends. Nick states that he heard rumors that the two had relations. Not understanding the accusation, Danny laughs, which irritates Nick, who demands an explanation. Danny clarifies that he would never do something like that with Lisa, because he considers her only a friend. But Nick does not believe it and insists that he admit it. Intimidated, Danny tries to move away, but Nick stops him and asks if he is waiting for Lisa at that place. Nervous, Danny denies it and approaches Calvin, beginning to talk about subjects they do not understand. Nick tells him to come back and continues to provoke him, asking if he still likes clubs and childish things. Danny answers that he does. Nick then says that is no longer appropriate for him and states that he can join their group as long as he passes 3 tests. Hesitant, Danny ends up accepting. The first challenge is to drink an entire beer without spilling. He says his parents do not allow it, but Nick assures that no one will know. Danny takes a sip and spits it out because he is not used to it, but Nick forces him to finish, and he obeys. When asking Calvin what the next test will be, he refuses to participate, and Julia suggests that Danny remove his clothes. Frightened, Danny says he does not want to do that, but Nick states that he has no choice. Becoming aggressive, Nick slaps him and pressures him to undress. Danny begins to remove his clothes and begs not to be completely naked. Nick warns that he will count to 3 and hit him again, and terrified, Danny obeys. Calvin tries to intervene, saying that this has gone too far, and Julia agrees. Even so, Nick, increasingly furious, declares that they will go straight to the final stage. Julia asks what it would be, and Nick replies that she will have to have relations with Danny. She refuses to do that and asks if he is going crazy, and Nick replies that she is already used to it. Calvin asks for calm, and he counters, asking if he is on Danny's side. Calvin tries to argue again, but Nick tells him to shut up and turns his attention back to the boy. He grabs him and says that this needs to be done, and Danny, crying, agrees. Then Nick reveals that he was joking, insults him and tells him to go get dressed in the tent. As soon as he enters, Nick calls the group to get the weapons and states that he needs to finish what he started. Calvin wants to know what he intends, and he answers that he is going to kill Danny for pedophilia. Calvin confronts him, saying the boy is not a monster. Then he states that all that fury is because of Lisa and asks if Nick really believes that the boy had something with her, leaving his friend thoughtful and Julia apprehensive. She reinforces that the two were involved and says that he seems harmless, but he is not. He declares that he cannot go back now, and Calvin asks why he insists on involving him in this. Nick again mentions what Danny could do to his sister, further irritating his friend. He questions why Calvin did not stop him earlier, if he believes so much in the boy's innocence. Outraged by the injustice, Calvin says he is angry with the wrong person, states that he is out and walks away, while Danny listens to everything from inside the tent. Nick approaches Julia and asks if she also wants to leave, but she refuses. He hands a weapon to her and runs to the tent, stabbing Danny through the fabric. The boy screams in pain, and he continues striking until Danny comes out, begging for mercy. Nick grabs a log, looks at him for a moment and hits him, leaving him severely injured. The two decide to take him deeper into the forest and wait for him to wake up. Badly hurt, Danny asks if he can go home, and Nick lies, saying yes. He helps him to stand up, only to hit him with several punches, which leaves Julia terrified. After assaulting him in various ways, he states that the only thing that matters is that he knows what he did. Danny faints again, and Julia is horrified by such cruelty. Nick says that now it is her turn to hurt him. She tries to refuse, but he claims that she started all this and that she needs to finish it. He begins to shout, pressuring her until, feeling cornered, she approaches. Julia gathers courage and delivers a blow, and the screams are heard by Calvin, who is leaving and decides to continue. However, upon hearing more screams, he decides to return to help, while Nick seems to enjoy the boy's suffering. Danny agonizes in pain and faints once more, and Nick, consumed by rage, he says that it is time to end it. When he is about to cut the boy's face, Calvin appears and asks what is happening. Nick asks him to come closer, and when he does, places the weapon in his hands, ordering him to finish the job. Disgusted, Calvin throws the weapon away and states that Danny has suffered enough. Nick retorts that they need to finish him right there, before he goes to the police. Calvin tries to distance himself from the responsibility, but Nick accuses him of being just as guilty as they are. In tears, Calvin says he is not a murderer, that Danny is not a monster, and asks if they are really going to kill an innocent person. He also states that Nick is only doing that because he cannot accept the rumors about Lisa. Consumed by anger, Nick lunges at Calvin and begins to beat him, while Danny, almost without strength, tries to crawl away. Julia insists that they stop, but they continue fighting, and Danny manages to stand up and begins to run. She quickly notices and warns Nick, who becomes furious, and Calvin takes the chance to flee as well. Julia tells Nick to chase him, and the two start searching for him through the forest, while Danny keeps running. He reaches an open field, but he is exhausted and in great pain because of his injuries. Suddenly, he is knocked down by Calvin, who tries to drag him to hide him. However, Danny does not stop screaming, and soon both are found. In tears, Calvin begs them to leave the boy alone, but dominated by fear, he runs to save his own life. Nick lets him go, takes a bag from his pocket, and places it over Danny's head. Then he grabs the blade and, consumed by fury, attacks him mercilessly. Julia pleads for him to stop, but he ignores her pleas and delivers the final blow. After the murder, Nick shows satisfaction and begins to walk away, while Julia remains in shock. She hurriedly follows him, and the two leave the body behind. Later, Danny's parents wait at the agreed meeting point, but their son does not appear. Robert feels a tightness in his chest, sensing that something is wrong, but tries to convince himself that the boy is just having difficulty dismantling the tent. Laura suggests surprising him, but Robert states that the place is intended only for boys. Distressed, she calls her son's cell phone, but the call goes to voicemail. Noticing his wife's anguish, Robert decides they should look for him, and the two leave the vehicle. In the end, those involved suffered the proper punishments. Julia was sentenced to 12 years in prison for second-degree murder, while Nicholas received life imprisonment for first-degree murder. Due to the nature of the crime, the three were criminally tried as adults and all pleaded guilty. As for Calvin, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for manslaughter, thus concluding the narrative.